Ever notice how some jokes just seem to stick to certain generations,
Uh-huh.
like boomers and their supposed struggle with technology?
Yeah.
We've all heard that one about how many boomers it takes to change a light bulb, right?
Right.
But what's fascinating is how AI, specifically AI image generators, view these generational stereotypes.
Yeah.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into a study that used AI to visualize generations. And you might be surprised by what they found, especially when it comes to boomers.
It really is intriguing.
Mm.
And it wasn't just one algorithm either. The study used 4 different AI image generators: Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, Yandexart, and Ernie Villagey.
4 different AIs. Wow.
Yeah, and they even made sure to select models from different parts of the world
Oh, really?
to see if that changed the results.
Interesting.
And to keep things as neutral as possible, they used really basic prompts, like Gen X at work or Millennial at home.
Okay.
No leading questions, just straightforward descriptions.
So no loaded prompts like, boomer struggling to send an email.
Exactly. The goal was to see what these AI models had learned on their own,
Yeah.
to get a glimpse into how they perceive each generation.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
So what did these AI artists reveal about the boomers?
Right?
Was it all dial-up modems and confusion over how to use a smartphone?
Well, you might expect, given the stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
You'd think the AI would just spit out images of boomers battling technology.
Right.
We're like longing for the good old days. And while there was some of that, especially with Yandex Art and Midjourney focusing on dream cars from the boomer youth.
Dream cars, you say?
Yeah.
So more classic cars and less struggling with social media?
Yeah, you can say that.
I'm kind of picturing a vintage Corvette right now.
You're not far off.
Okay.
Midjourney seemed to have a real thing for associating boomers with those kinds of cars. But here's the interesting part. Alongside those nostalgic rides, Midjourney also generated a lot of images of boomers looking, well, rather melancholy.
Melancholy. That's not the image that usually comes to mind.
Right.
So we're talking less happy days and more like subtle sadness.
Almost. There's this one image from Midjourney that's really stuck with me. It's a simple scene, a boomer couple on a date.
Okay.
But here's the catch. They're both crying.
Wow.
It's like Midjourney tapped into some hidden well of boomer sadness that we haven't really seen reflected in popular culture.
Wow, that's a powerful image. I'm curious, how often did this melancholy vibe pop up in Midjourney's results?
It was surprisingly prevalent.
Okay.
Nearly 80% of Midjourney's boomer images had this kind of air of apathy,
Really?
of just existing rather than truly thriving.
Wow, almost 80%. And here I thought millennials were supposed to be the burnout generation.
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it?
It is.
And what makes it even more intriguing is that another AI, Ernie Villagey, had a completely different take on boomers.
Oh.
Their depictions were predominantly positive, showing boomers as happy, active, and generally content.
Okay, so we've got Midjourney painting this portrait of quiet sadness,
Right.
and Ernie Villagey showing boomers living their best lives.
Yeah.
That's a pretty stark difference. Do the researchers have any theories about what might be causing such a dramatic discrepancy between these AI models?
Well, Matt Hashim, an expert in AI and cultural trends, suggests it could be a few things.
Okay.
One possibility is what's called generational comparison bias.
Generational comparison bias.
Yes. Remember how the AI models were trained on massive data sets of images?
Right, like a crash course in visual culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, because younger generations tend to have a much larger and more active online presence.
Right.
The AI might be subconsciously contrasting boomers' perceived offline lives with the more digitally driven lives of millennials and Gen Z.
So it's not that boomers are necessarily unhappy.
Right.
It's just that the AI might be interpreting their lower online presence as a sign of, well, melancholy. It's like assuming that someone who doesn't post constantly on social media must be living a dull life. It really makes you wonder how those algorithms work sometimes.
Yeah.
And what kind of quirks they pick up along the way. But speaking of quirks, let's move on to the generations known for practically living online. Millennials and Gen Z.
Right.
I have to admit, going into this, I was expecting a tidal wave of avocado toast and selfie sticks.
Those are pretty persistent stereotypes.
Right. Millennials juggling student debt and avocado toast addictions, while Gen Z documents their every move on TikTok.
Right.
I was almost disappointed not to see any Tide Pods in the mix.
Thankfully, those cliches were nowhere to be found.
Okay.
Instead, the AI seemed to pick up on some of the more positive trends we see with these generations.
Okay.
For example, one of the most striking findings was the increased racial and cultural diversity in the AI's depictions of millennials and Gen Z,
Okay.
particularly when compared to the representations of boomers.
So the AI is reflecting the real-world trend of increasing diversity in younger generations. That's encouraging to hear.
It is. And it's not just limited to race and ethnicity. The AI models, especially Yandex Art and Ernie Vilji, also presented a much more balanced picture when it came to gender representation in these generations.
How interesting.
We saw far more images of women in a variety of contexts compared to the depictions of older generations.
Okay, so more diverse, more gender balanced. That's a pretty significant shift.
Yeah.
Do the experts have any theories about what might be driving this trend in the AI's output?
Lisa Sparks, who specializes in digital culture, suggests it has to do with the fact that millennials and Gen Z are digital natives.
Right.
They've grown up with the internet, and as a result, they have a much larger and more multifaceted digital footprint.
That makes sense. More online activity, more data, more for the AI to learn from.
Exactly. Think of it this way.
Yeah.
Trying to teach an AI about a generation with limited online presence is like trying to paint a portrait from a faded Polaroid.
Okay.
You might get some basic details right, but the overall picture will be incomplete.
Right.
But with millennials and Gen Z, the AI has a whole library of high-resolution images to work with,
Right.
a much richer data set that captures the nuances of their experiences.
It's like having access to a whole photo album instead of just a single snapshot.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But even with all that data, it wasn't all perfect smiles and effortless cool for millennials and Gen Z, was it? There was that interesting paradox with Gen Z where they were shown as both incredibly expressive and, well, kind of stressed out.
It is a bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have all these vibrant images of Gen Z, embracing individuality, being creative, and pushing boundaries.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's this undercurrent of anxiety,
Yeah.
almost a sense of unease that seems to permeate many of the images,
Interesting.
particularly in Midjourney's and Yandex Art's outputs.
So how do we reconcile those two extremes? Why would Gen Z be portrayed as both the most individualistic and the most stressed generation?
Right.
It's an intriguing contradiction.
It is, and Stephanie Kermer, who researches both sociology and AI, has a compelling theory.
Okay.
She argues that because so much of the data about Gen Z comes from social media,
Right.
where people often present their most authentic, unfiltered selves,
Yeah.
the AI might be picking up on the very real anxieties and pressures that this generation faces. They're not just projecting an image, they're living it online,
Yeah.
and the AI is reflecting that back at us.
That's a fascinating thought. It's like they're not trying to mask their stress, they're sharing it, processing it, and the AI is interpreting that as a core part of the Gen Z experience.
Precisely. It's almost as if the AI is giving us a glimpse into the raw, unedited emotional landscape of Gen Z,
Wow.
which is both fascinating and a little bit unsettling.
It makes you wonder about the long-term impact of growing up in that kind of pressure cooker environment.
Indeed. And speaking of unexpected findings, one thing that surprised the researchers was that Midjourney's depictions of Gen Z actually showed significantly lower levels of alcohol consumption compared to other generations.
Really?
Yeah.
Even though social media is practically overflowing with pictures of people partying and, well, enjoying a few drinks.
It seems so. It could be that Midjourney is picking up on a genuine trend of younger people choosing to drink less,
Okay.
or perhaps it's simply another quirk of its algorithm, something that we haven't quite deciphered yet.
I guess with AI, there's always an element of mystery, isn't there? Like trying to decode a complex puzzle.
Yeah.
But speaking of puzzles, I have to ask about this. The AI seem to have a really hard time distinguishing between millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
Was it just me, or were those images almost interchangeable at times?
You're not imagining things. The AI really struggled to create distinct visual identities for those two generations. Both were often depicted as being roughly the same age, wearing similar clothing, and even exhibiting similar levels of stress.
So why the generational blur? Why is the AI having such a hard time separating the millennials from the Gen Zers?
One theory, again from Kermer, suggests it might have to do with the sheer volume of youthful imagery available from millennials and Gen Z. Remember, these generations have grown up documenting their lives online, and that constant stream of youthful images might be making it difficult for the AI to visually differentiate between the two groups as they age.
It's like the AI's perception of aging is being influenced by the data it's being fed.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
it is. It raises some interesting questions about how we perceive aging in a digital age, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered boomers, millennials, and Gen Z. What about Gen X? Did the AI have any groundbreaking insights into the middle child of generations? So Gen X, the generation that's mastered the art of not being easily defined,
It seems that way.
even by AI, it seems.
Right.
But if the AI struggled to define Gen X, what did we actually get? Was it just a bunch of blurry images and question marks?
Not quite blurry images,
Right.
but definitely more ambiguity compared to the other generations.
Uh-huh.
You know, those stereotypical Gen X markers like the flannel shirts and a grunge aesthetic or that trademark whatever attitude,
Yeah.
they were surprisingly absent from the AI's visual vocabulary.
So instead of angst-ridden rockers in ripped jeans, what did Gen X look like through the AI's lens?
Well, that's the thing. Even the AI couldn't seem to settle on a specific look for Gen X.
Huh.
Sometimes they were depicted as being closer in age to boomers,
Right.
while other times they looked more like millennials. It's as if the AI couldn't quite place them on the generational timeline,
Interesting.
which, when you think about it, is kind of a perfect representation of Gen X's in-between status.
The ultimate in-betweeners.
Yeah.
Always defying expectations.
There you go.
But there were a few interesting tidbits that emerged, right? Something about Gen X men and kids.
Yes, this was one of the more unexpected findings. When the researchers prompted the AI to generate images of Gen X with kids, Stable Diffusion in particular showed a strong tendency to depict men with children, often without any women present.
Interesting. So a lot of single dads or maybe divorced dads raising kids solo?
That's one way to interpret it.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a departure from how the AI represented families in other generations.
Right.
It's worth noting that Midjourney and Yandex art also had a slight bias toward showing Gen X men with kids, but not to the same extent as Stable Diffusion.
So is this a case of the AI picking up on a real-world demographic trend within Gen X? Or is it just another one of those AI mysteries that we can't quite crack?
It's tough to say for sure.
Huh.
But Lisa Sparks, our resident expert on digital culture, suggests it might be a reflection of the broader societal shifts and media narratives that surrounded Gen X as they were coming of age.
Okay.
Remember, this is the generation that experienced a significant rise in divorce rates.
Right.
So it's possible that those narratives have subtly influenced the AI's understanding of Gen X family structures.
That's a fascinating point. It really highlights how AI can sometimes act as a mirror, reflecting back at us our own cultural assumptions, even those we might not be consciously aware of. But before we wrap up our deep dive into the AI's generational portraits, I have to ask about this one universal theme that emerged: beer.
Yeah.
Apparently, according to AI, everyone loves a good beer, regardless of their generation.
It's true. No matter which generation the AI was asked to depict, no matter which AI model was doing the depicting, there was always a cold one within arm's reach.
Really?
It's as if the AI looked at all the data and concluded, what bridges the generational divide?
Yeah.
Beer.
Which, let's be honest, isn't entirely inaccurate. But I thought Gen Z was all about that healthy, sober, curious lifestyle.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Mm.
But even the health-conscious Zoomers in those AI-generated images couldn't resist the allure of a frosty beverage.
Interesting.
It just goes to show some things are apparently timeless, even in the eyes of AI.
So we've journeyed through the fascinating and sometimes perplexing world of how AI views different generations, from the melancholy undertones of boomers to the diverse but stressed out Zoomers. As we wrap things up here, what's the key takeaway you hope our listeners ponder as they head out into the world, perhaps with a beverage of their choice in hand?
I think the most crucial thing to remember is that these AI-generated images aren't just amusing experiments.
Right.
They provide a unique window into how these increasingly influential technologies perceive us both as individuals and as members of specific generations.
Right.
They offer a glimpse into the algorithms that are rapidly shaping our digital world.
It's like holding up a mirror to the machines.
Exactly.
Trying to understand how they see us. Right.
And that understanding is more important now than ever before.
Right.
By closely examining these AI-generated reflections, we can start to unravel the complex tapestry of data and algorithms that shape the technology we interact with every day. It allows us to ask critical questions about potential biases, about the stories these technologies are telling, and ultimately, about how we want to shape our relationship with AI in the future.
It's a conversation that's only going to become more important as AI becomes even more intertwined with our lives. Thanks for joining us for this thought-provoking deep dive. It's been a truly enlightening exploration.